Welcome to the new episode of our podcast on the spot, zooming in the world. Today's topic is the general elections in Austria that were held yesterday. So I have a great pleasure to welcome today as our guest Mrs. Teresa Reiter, Europe Futures Fellow at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. Among other positions, she was for 3 years, if I'm not wrong, policy advisor for European affairs, foreign policy, defense, migration, and development cooperation in the NEOS party, the liberal Austrian party, staunchly pro-European. So, Teresa, thank you very much for accepting my invitation.
Thank you for inviting me.
So yesterday we had elections in Austria, and it was rather expected that the far right would win. This is what the polls were saying all the time. And so this is just another puzzle to this right-wing swing in Europe. So my question is, what were the main issues during the electoral campaign, and how did the Freedom Party managed to restore its image after this Ibiza affairs and the corruption affair that brought down the previous government in 2019?
So first of all, I would like to say that even though the Freedom Party, the far-right FPÖ, was leading the polls for 2.5 years ahead of the election, it was not so clear that they would definitely win. During the last few weeks, the center-right ÖVP, they actually didn't perform too badly. Their campaign was very focused in the end. The chancellor, I don't think he made any big mistakes in his performance, and he's somewhat known for sometimes making clumsy statements, but none of these things really happened during the last weeks. Also, Austria was hit by severe floods, which for the moment stole the thunder from the FPÖ, because during such a time of crisis, you cannot really behave like they usually behave in an election campaign, like with super harsh criticism against the political opponent, because people would not accept it. They want their politicians to see that their suffering and their loss at the moment is much more pressing than any election campaign spat. 4 people died in these floods, including a firefighter who was trying to help other people. So it was really not the moment for super populist campaigns. So many people thought, I think, that because the center-right ÖVP did so well in responding to the crisis, lots of the mayors of the flooded areas are ÖVP people, that they might have won some percentage points back. So then it was a surprise that it was so clear right away that the FPÖ had won. We thought that within the margin of error of 2%, we would not know until much later who had won that race. That was rather tight, because you never really knew how big the difference between number 1 and 2 were in the polls. Yes, now the FPÖ and the Ibiza scandal. For the first thing is that Herbert Kickl, the current leader of the FPÖ, who is by many experts considered to be more extreme than his predecessors in his positions and also in his wordings, in his rhetorics, he was not in Ibiza. He is not on that video. He managed to keep himself out of that whole scandal, even though he had his own scandal when he was interior minister in between 2017 and 2019 in the coalition with the ÖVP. There was a raid against one of Austria's intelligence services, the one that was below the interior ministry, which was led by him. So basically the interior ministry raided their own intelligence service with like evidence showing that some very sensitive data was not treated very well at the time. So despite all of this, Herbert Kickl managed to present himself as the one who kind of did the catharsis with the FPÖ after the Ibiza scandal. Heinz Christian Strache, the former vice chancellor, was kicked out of the party. Also, his deputy Johann Gudenus had to leave the party. So they were quite good at creating the impression that they had dealt with this scandal in a way that they always accused the ÖVP of never having dealt with their scandals and never having gotten rid of the people who were involved or were allegedly involved in corruption. So this, I think, worked quite well. And then click, it was 2019, new elections, half a year later, the pandemic hits. So the attention turned away from the corruption scandals, from Ibiza, from the whole aftermath. It's all of a sudden, it's lockdown in Austria, it's debates about compulsory vaccination. And there were a lot of people that felt rubbed the wrong way by these very restrictive corona measures. And for a long time, nobody but the FPÖ realized that nobody was listening to these people. So they very early were the home that received many of these people who did not feel heard. Then Russia attacked Ukraine. Energy prices soared, inflation. The FPÖ blamed everything on the sanctions that the European Union implemented against Russia. And at the same time, Austria is militarily neutral. So Austria's support of the European Union position on the side of Ukraine in this war was also not understandable to some people who, again, were spoken to by the FPÖ. So they're very good at creating like a framework narrative and then integrating really everything that happens, every policy area, specifically migration, into a kind of us versus them narrative. And that worked really well, I think.
Okay, but okay, we can understand to some extent why the ruling coalition parties, like the People's Parties and the Greens, they lost their seat. But how about the Social Democrats? They were in a position, but they still had, I think, the worst result in history.
Yes, they did. So the Social Democrats, a lot of people say that you don't win elections in the last few weeks of the election campaign, but you win them in the years before. The Social Democrats had very turbulent years before. They came out of an internal power struggle in early summer 23, when they had internal elections for the chairperson. Pamela Rendi-Wagner was ousted, and after a back and forth who had won and mistakes were made in Excel tables and some embarrassing scene, Andreas Babler won. So this guy is further leftist than former leaders of the SPÖ. He's kind of trying a 70s revival of social democracy, which many people found a little bit anachronistic, since 70s social democracy in today's challenges is not always a great match. And he only had 1 year to get the party on his side, to reform the organization, to prepare a new program, to convince new voters, to get people to get to know him, because he was a mayor in a Lower Austrian town, but he wasn't known on the national level. So I think that might have been too much of a mission, particularly with voices from within the party that were criticizing him all the time publicly. So it was not a very unified party, and their responses to current challenges sometimes sounded to many people, I think, too much like utopia. So they could not take them serious. It's not like people don't want the 30-hour work week or anything, but they can just not imagine how this is going to happen without them paying for it.
And how about your former colleagues from NEOS? They are, like, let's say, the junior winners of this election. They won more than 9%. So what contributed to their success?
So the Neos have increased their results over the years, bit by bit. It's a very hard struggle. It's like a plant that grows very slowly. I think the reason why they won a little bit, like a percentage point from the last election result in 2019, was their continuous work on anti-corruption. That certainly played a role. They also had a rather, like, they saw the shades of gray in the corona pandemic prevention policies, so they were never on one extreme side, I think. Some of them also voted against the compulsory vaccination that was never implemented anyway. I mean, it was way too late when they came up with it, and nothing ever happened there. But this was seen by people. And I think that the fact that to this day there is no case of large scale corruption from the NEOS, that still plays a role, particularly in a political landscape where many people feel like the whole political caste is corrupt.
Mhm. And now, having in mind the post-election map, so what are the possibilities for creating a new government, particularly having in mind that the Social Democrats, the Greens, and NEOS ruled out the coalition partnership with Freedom Party, but on the other hand, the Prime Minister said also ruled out the coalition with the Freedom Party if their lead candidate, Kickel, is nominated for the Prime Minister position. So can we face some kind of the Netherlands scenario? To Kiko to step down, and or it's not realistic for this chancellor.
So mathematically, we have, I think, the biggest choice of coalition options that we've maybe ever had or had in a long time. What is politically realistic is a different story. So any coalition, I think, needs to include the center-right ÖVP. There is an Austrian political scientist was quoted by the New York Times saying a lot of things always change in Austria. Hundreds of thousands of people switch party, and in the end, the ÖVP is still in government. So there is truth to this. They have been in government for 37 years or something now. They're in all institutions and everywhere, which gives them an edge in coalition negotiations because they just know all the numbers, know everything, know everybody. So even though mathematically it would also be possible for the Social Democrats to form a coalition with the FPÖ, I doubt that the SPÖ would survive such a move unified. I think they might just break apart if one part of the leadership would decide to enter a coalition with the FPÖ, particularly after this move to the left in this election. I think that would not be survivable. So we have the ÖVP in government. The ÖVP now has three choices. They can either build a coalition with the FPÖ, which they said they would not do as long as the FPÖ insists on making Herbert Kickl chancellor or a government minister. Observers say, well, the ÖVP has broken this exact promise before. They are currently in three provinces in Austria. They're in government with the FPÖ. In two of them, they promised ahead of the election that they will not cooperate with them. So not a great history, but last night, the chancellor, when he spoke about the FPÖ, he seemed very, very sincere. You could see like how physically uneasy he felt about the things Herbert Kickl said regarding democracy and regarding the future of the country. So I think many people now believe him personally that he doesn't want that government coalition with Kickl as long as there is another option. He could. They also could enter a two-party coalition, like the traditional grand coalition of the past, together with the Social Democrats. They have a narrow margin in parliament, narrow majority in parliament with 2 seats, which is not nothing, but two seats over 50% means that all the MPs need to be present at every vote. Nobody can be sick, nobody can be traveling. You really need everybody there to get your policies through. This is rather unpractical. Also, an election where people voted for parties to show that they want change, maybe the Grand Old Coalition is not the best response to this. But who knows? It stands for stability, so it's not an easy answer. But the most viable option, I think, is that they take one of the smaller parties as a third party on board. So that would be either the Liberal Neos or the Greens. Neos seems a little bit more likely at the moment because the recent conflicts within the current government between the ÖVP and the Greens, they really made it hard, I think, for them. They need the relationship break. I would say they need to get away from each other for a while to heal the wounds of having governed together for the last 5 years, which is an amazing result. Nobody thought they would make it, but they did, and they actually performed much better than many people are saying. So stuff happened, actually.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And how about the voting patterns, both regionally and demographically? I read somewhere I was surprised by that. I don't know whether it's true that women vote more than men for the Freedom Party, and I don't know whether it's, but I read somewhere, and also because we are here in the Western Balkans, ex-Yugoslavia. How about the voting patterns of people from ex-Yugoslavia?
Mhm. Okay, so for the first part of your question, it was traditionally the other way around. It used to be mostly men that voted for the FPÖ, mostly men between, I would say, 30 and 50.
Mhm.
Now it's true that there are some women more that voted for the FPÖ, but it's almost equal. So you can see in all demographic groups, in all age groups under 60, that the FPÖ is leading, both with men and with women. Over 60, the ÖVP still has the edge. They were strongly focusing on policies for retired people, for elderly people, elderly care, etc., pensions. So that really worked. And I think without them, their results might have been catastrophic. But the DFB, what I think is much more interesting is that the youth vote, there is no significant difference to other age groups, neither in voting behavior nor in voting motives. So when you look at what the main topics were, that first of all, most people voted because of policies and not because of people in this election, which is also quite unusual. I mean, only with the Neos, the top candidate played a significant role, I think, even with the FPÖ that had Herbert Kickl so prominently in that campaign, people were still looking at their policies. And there were two topics that were very strong throughout all age groups, and this was inflation and immigration. So third place was then concerns about democracy or health system, and then nothing for a long time, and then there is somewhere climate change, even though there were these large disasters, right? So this is new to us. I think that people agree so much, regardless of their age, on what the main challenges to Austria are. Austria saw a rise in asylum applications. You could argue not all of these people stayed in Austria, and we were a transit country and everything, but this is a topic. Like, Austria is a conservative country, and everybody who tells you otherwise hasn't lived here. Um, people don't want a larger influx of migrants anymore. And with migrants, we're not interestingly, we're not talking about people from the Western Balkans or from Turkey or anything. These don't feel like migrants anymore in the public debate, right? Now we're talking Syrians, Afghans, people from North Africa. This is what the FPÖ is talking about when they're talking about migrants, particularly migrants of Muslim faith. We had some incidents of attempted terrorist attacks recently. The perpetrators or those who were planning these attacks, they get younger and younger. They're now 12, 14, 15 years old. And like catch one, catch five the next week. It's like, seems like never ending these days. We only had one really, really large, well, for our proportions, large terrorist attack in 2020. But still, people feel it all around. Also, the one perpetrator now shot in Germany was had an Austrian connection and stuff like that. So this is still an ongoing topic. And as far as the voting patterns among migrant communities, like older migrant communities, so people from former Yugoslavia are concerned, there are still a lot that don't have Austrian citizenship due to if you want to own a house in the Balkans, etc., at least one family member needs citizenship or something in some countries. So a lot of the previous generation, at least, did not yet acquire Austrian citizenship. The kids that were born here usually have it. A lot of them vote for the Social Democrats, which I think is some kind of feeling of closeness to former Yugoslavian policies or something. Also, the Social Democrats are traditionally, they were the old Labor Party. So a lot of the Gastarbeiter, which is the previous generation and the one above, still felt represented by this party before the FPÖ rose and rose. So you have them, then you have the younger generation, the more educated generation that might lean more towards the Greens or even Neos. And then you have the far-right FPÖ targeting the Serbs in Austria because they are Christian. So quite recently, you had the FPÖ MEP Harald Wilimski visiting Serbia at the invitation of Alexander Vucic. He brought with him two city politicians from Vienna who are already preparing for the Vienna elections next year, where the Serbs will be a significant target group for the FPÖ as well. So this is what I can say about this, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. And last but not least, since you mentioned policies, especially related to migration, and one of the main slogans of the Freedom Party was Fortress Austria. And we can see like emerging a fortress Mitteleuropa, for the Freedom Party, the Orban's Hungary is a model, then you have also Slovakia, etc. So how would both internal and external policies be affected in Austria, regardless of what the kind of government, what coalition would be created? Speaking about foreign policy, whether we had just a few days ago just a statement by the new French Minister for Europe, who said that this new European legislature is a chance to tighten migration rules. So can you expect some changes also at the European level due to this rise of far right in Europe?
Well, you might have heard that the Austrian Finance Minister Magnus Brunner of the center-right ÖVP is going to become the next European Commissioner for Migration Issues. I had to smile a little bit at President von der Leyen's humor, making that country, putting that country in charge of migration that is always complaining about European migration policies. But I think that migration is really something that none of the parties can control. To promise that Austria can in some way protect all of its national borders against irregular migration is an illusion. We have a demographic change that is felt in every sector of economy. It's also felt by the public service. There have never been enough policemen. There were always recruitment issues. Even if we hadn't even if we had enough policemen, even if we put the army at our borders, which we cannot do because now the army is much more busy with thinking about territorial defense ever since Russia invaded Ukraine. Even then, it would not be enough to build a Festung Österreich, so a fortress Austria. So even the FPÖ is actually speaking about external border controls at the European Union external border, which is something that kind of everybody agrees on, that this must happen and it must work. The issue is just like Valentin Inzko recently at the panel discussion in Vienna, he was the former high representative of the European Union in Bosnia and Herzegovina. He said he doesn't understand Frontex has been around for so long. Why is this still not working? And that he feels that some EU policies were built to never actually be functional. So this I found was an interesting quote. Even though everybody wants external border protection and Frontex to work somehow, it still doesn't work. So regardless of what the FPÖ would do, I don't think they could influence other EU member states to such an extent that they would grant competencies to Frontex, the European Union, and by extension Frontex on their territory in such an extent that this would actually really work on all the very, very long borders of the European Union, or at least the most penetrated.
Mhm.
So the only thing I think they can do is limit access to social benefits for migrants in Austria. And what I find interesting is that because in the recent debates in recent years we never spoke of people from the Western Balkans or the rest of Eastern Europe as Ausländer, as immigrants anymore. They seem to somehow feel that if the FPÖ would change these policies, it would not affect them. But if, as an Austrian, like as a person living in Austria, you would only have access to social benefits after 5 years, this would definitely also hit people from the Western Balkans who had just recently moved to Austria for work or for something else. So I don't think this is very clear to many voters. And it's also like this is not going to resolve any problems. If you cut social benefits for people who are already bored and have nothing in Austria, you will see a surge in crime, which is, of course, another thing for the far right to campaign on. So they are good at keeping the influx of problems high enough for them to still continue to exist and thrive. And I'm curious to see whether we will actually see any development when Magnus Brunner is migration commissioner. The Germany's recent decision to start repatriating people to Afghanistan through neighboring countries is certainly something to watch, I think, because Austria usually follows on Germany's example. The other thing is whatever will happen in that deal between Italy and Albania as an experiment of having asylum proceedings in a third state and not somewhere in Africa, but somewhere close enough where you can actually implement European procedures and it will still not be on European soil. I think the outcome of this experiment will also be very important for the future of Austria's migration policy.